Okay, what are we going to talk about, Steele?
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about things that will hopefully be interesting to an extremely intellectual crowd. It just so happens that we have a pretty intellectual person here. So I'm extremely grateful for the conversation. We're grateful that you are here at Missional AI. Thanks to the creators of Missional AI. I mean, I can't imagine, guys, that you guys would have imagined just a few years ago what this would grow into and the types of impact that this would be having on the world. And so it tees up this conversation. I'll start by saying I love your outfit today, Pat.
Oh, yeah.
Looking good.
We're buds, right? Yeah. What you wearing today, Steele? Okay, the black? No, okay, good.
Yeah. All right. You talk a lot about the intersection of faith and technology in your career. Tell us a little bit about that. What does that look like, and how has that shaped the decisions that you've made to now spend time with Glue and with Playground?
Yeah, and as I've been, and I said yesterday, a full-time minister in the workplace. And to me, right, if you're a person of faith, you are a full-time minister. And for so much of my career, it seemed like you were trying to, fit a square peg in a round hole. Right, is how do you bring faith into the workplace? And we've had some phenomenal, successful things. Like one of those, I started the Intel Christian Bible Network, right? Which became sort of like the role model ERG. And if you're familiar with corporations, ERG, is employee resource groups, right? And you can have, like the Native American ERG. You can have the Women in Tech ERG. Well, we had the first. ERG was the Intel Christian Bible Network. But it was always like, how do you fit that in this, right? How do you bring your faith and how do you represent faith? What does it look like, to be a workplace minister? And when I started Intel Christian Bible Network, the first talk I gave was on juggling, right? And Intel was known to be an intense workforce, right? Okay, so how do you make faith, family, and work fit together? And that became the book, The Juggling Act, for it. So it was always, how do you make these things fit? And as ERGs became more popular, the UN recognized Intel and VMware and myself in that journey. But it was always, okay, faith is so important to human existence. How can it show up in the workplace? So this has been a journey, and how you influence that over time. And now if you fast forward to today, and there were many bad examples, I was given written warnings at Intel and other things like that, the poster boy for faith in the workplace, and I had my HR director threaten to fire me one time, and all these crazy things, meeting with the Pope and so on. It was always, struggling how to go make that work. And now at this point, particularly with Glue, bringing faith and tech together, okay, it's like peanut butter and jelly. These things fit together. We want to be faithful. We want to, do great work. We want to build extraordinary products and technology, and we're going to do it for the faith ecosystem. It just couldn't be better to see those come together after this career-long journey of a little bit of square peg, round hole kind of problems.
That's so good. So you talked about the Juggling Act. Talk about just a couple of principles. Maybe what are the one or two that you would want this audience to know about?
Sure, and the book I published 12 years ago. It's still I still get lots of people commenting on the benefit that it's had in their lives. But in it, dating your spouse. How do you have busy time, so are you continuing to come back and truly date your spouse? You're putting her on the throne. I dated my kids. Right, we would do breakfast one day a week. I would take them to school, and we would go out for breakfast. They'd eat their plate and mine as well, and it was all wonderful, particularly with boys. Well, last week I had breakfast with my son-in-law and with my son. Continuing that tradition today, being in their lives as well. We had the at-home chart. Right, how many of you work too late? Okay, I work too late. I get consumed. So we started to keep score, right? If I was home by 5, that was 2 points. If I was home by 6:15, that was 1 point. After that was 0 points. That was the numerator. Weekends away were minus 1 point. The denominator was the number of work days. My secretary, as an independent arbiter, would publish the at-home chart to Linda and I. Right? And of course, hey, I'm a goal-oriented guy. I want to get a good score, right? So, hey, 6:13 at the end of the street. Sorry, team, got to go. I'm getting a point tonight, right? So, right? You just got to do things to keep balance between faith and work and, life. Putting God on the throne each day. Starting in devotion each morning. Okay, and some days God stays on the throne of your life till about 8:02 a.m., and tomorrow your goal is 8:03 a.m., right? Because there's so many challenges and things in it, but this journey of life, how do you make faith, family, and work fit and still have a flourishing, impactful, stunning career?
So while we're on the personal track for a second, we'll get into some deeply technical conversations. But on the personal side, you're a man of very strong faith. You obviously talk about spiritual disciplines in your life and how they show up and how they've shaped your career, how they've shaped you as a husband, you as a father, now as a grandfather.
Well, for a couple of examples, one is how's my day start every day, right? Wake up, I check the driftwood that's come in on the beach at night, so do a quick view of the inbox, the email, then I go work out in the morning. Right after my coffee, I drink coffee every day. With enough coffee, all things are possible, right? Then have my workout time. I listen. My first thing I do during workout is listen to the audio Bible for 10 minutes. Then other books or whatever else I'm reading and so on. After the workout, have devotion time. Right, spend time. Right now I'm. This morning was Psalm 107 and 108. Right, this morning, be in the Word regularly, be in prayer regularly. Today is Thursday. Every Thursday is prayer and fast day for me. So I've been doing that for about 25 years. We're fasting 1 day a week, good for body, mind, and soul. So I just got an update from Gregory. They're having one of my prayer and fasting partners. He prays and fasts with me every Thursday. So being in relation with other people that are encouraging your spiritual disciplines as well. And Gregory, hey, one of their sons is having a challenging time right now. So I'm praying for Nicholas, Gregory's son, my prayer and fasting buddy. And by the way, some of the people that you start praying and fasting with, hey, they get to be pretty cool. Right now I have a former prime minister that I text regularly with, UK prime minister who's praying and fasting with me every Thursday, right? Because a mutual friend was praying and fasting, who was a good friend of his, and he started the spiritual discipline with us as well. And again, these are mine, and I'm not saying they're the right ones for anyone else, but what are the things that cause you to keep God regularly in the center of your existence, in your family, in your practices? And take the spiritual disciplines, and whether you're a Richard Foster fan or whoever, and pick those that really help you grow, mature, and be in the center of God in your life on a regular basis.
It's a hard thing to do. So you are in your fast now, and that is something that you've talked about in social, in your social profiles, just the power of fasting. Can you emphasize that? Just go deeper into just fasting. That is a unique thing, right? That not enough of us do.
And if you look through Scripture, I forget what the number is, but how many times it talks about prayer. Well, about a third of the time it talks about prayer in Scripture, it's prayer and fasting. So, man, this is deep in scriptural tradition, and why aren't you doing it? If the Bible has it said that often over and over again, why aren't we all doing it? And something like I say, I started to do 25 years ago. To me, it's a question of body. Keeps me healthy. Hey, I overeat sometimes. I like sweets too much. Okay, I'm in charge of my body, right? My mind. Okay, when I'm prompted on Thursdays for hunger, what does it cause me to do? Okay, mind, you're not in control. I will be a spiritual being today. And every one of those promptings takes you back to being good for soul. right? And my favorite hymn is "It Is Well with My Soul," right? And is your soul healthy? Do you have good soul care? And to me, this idea of good for body, mind, and soul, a regular discipline around that, has been, super beneficial, for me. Now, some people, my wife, the idea of fasting is an anathema to her, right? She's just on sort of the edge of blood sugar levels and so on. And it's like, no, she doesn't do it. Some of my kids do it with me as well. And again, different people and, fasting of different things as well. It may not, it may be, different aspects that allow you to fit into your routines as well. But this idea of giving up so I get a deeper relationship with God on a regular basis, that's powerful.
That's an easy thing for many of us, certainly me, to hear and go, I'm so glad you do that. I don't know if I'm ready to do that just yet. You're obviously a great role model for the impact that can have on your life. So what a champion you are for that.
Well, by the way, that's why it's so good to have other people you're doing it with, right? Oh man, I don't feel like doing it today, but I'm going to talk to Fred. And Fred's going to ask me if I'm praying and fasting. I can't embarrass myself with Fred. So anyway, you just got to find ways to keep yourself accountable in these things.
Accountability structures.
Yeah,
that's great. Okay, so now let's shift a little bit into the technical. Let's start with Playground. You've described the work that Playground is doing as working with deep and long technologies. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, and if you go to many of the venture capital firms, the first thing you see is a wall of tombstones. We're going to make you a billionaire just like Airbnb founder or Netflix founder or Google founders and so on. You walk into Playground, you're greeted by a robot, right? Free electron laser, right? A big 3D printer. I mean, this is a engineer's playground, and truly we have a playground in the middle of the headquarters, right? A slide and swings and so on. Yeah, the biggest
pretty normal.
Oh yeah, bring the grandkids. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, right, associated with it. But the idea of Playground is an engineer's playground where we take the earliest companies. Our motto is we invest somewhere between the impossible and the improbable. And, hard tech problems, most investors are looking for proven entrepreneurs. How many IPOs have you had? 4. Well, okay, you're worth the risk. For us, almost all of our founders are engineers, technologists, research teams, professors, that have never had a successful IPO, right? So it's a very different model. And we're working on super hard, long tech problems like Quantum, our quantum computing startup. At this point, I think Playground is into them 8 years, right? The typical fund life for most venture capitals is 7 years. We're 8 years into this one, and we have at least 5 more years to go, right, until it could successfully IPO. So the duration of these, projects is simply much longer. And we're trying to work on things that truly transform humanity. Quantum computing, superconducting, next generation light sources, finding new mRNA markers, being able to detect cancers much, much earlier, and, things that really, if they happen, high risk, but if they happen, we truly have changed society and changed the world.
All right, so let's pick one of those technologies and maybe exaggerate a little bit. There's a lot of incredible technologies. We're talking about artificial intelligence here. This is the Missional AI conference, but we have a room of technologists here who might be going, okay, what's after Gen AI? You shared a great slide. You've got the agentic AI. We've got these different eras that we know we're tracking toward. But let's talk about quantum for a second.
Yeah.
One, describe quantum for the room and give a little bit of your vision. How many years are we away from that practically impacting our lives?
Yeah, so quantum computing, sort of this, and Einstein's description was some of the quantum effects was spooky, right? Okay, some of these things are really sort of mind-boggling, but if you think about, say, computing like we know today, it basically is always done in a bit, right? 1, 0. Sometimes you might try to represent a couple of states, right? Like if you're a flash memory. For instance, maybe you have 2 or 3 bits of information, right, in a single state. Well, when you go to quantum, you have qubits, right? And qubits are basically, produced by different techniques that maybe, is the spin of an electron would be representing your qubit. The, polarity of a photon, right, might be the case, a superconducting experience. So there are different ways to create qubits, but the magic of qubits is they don't just have a 0, 1 state, they can have a lot of states. And, this is the spooky part of it, qubits can be entangled with other qubits, right, as well. So you essentially get this exponential increase in the amount of state that can be represented by quantum computations. So now you have this really, for a guy who was built and learned on Boolean logic, right, of 0, 1s, ands, ors, and so on like that, this is quite mind-blowing. But, the magic of it is if you can actually create at-scale quantum computing, we can solve certain classes of problems that are billions of times more efficient than digital computers we know and love today. So literally problems that we would try to solve on a digital computer today literally could take 1 billion years today, can be solved in a few hours on a quantum computer. And, are those problems interesting? Well, most of the interesting things in humanity today are quantum effects. Semiconductor is a quantum effect. Most of biology is a quantum effect. Most of material science is quantum effects. So if I can compute in quantum on the quantum issues, you can be dramatically more efficient. So this will lead to new material structures, new biology innovations, new ability to identify diseases that can't be considered today. It really is exciting if we get them built. So when are we going to get them built? Well, at the NVIDIA Developer Conference a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking. It's Jensen's big show. He said we're a couple of decades away. I said we're a couple of years away. Well, Jensen and I have been arguing for 30 or 40 years with each other, so we're sort of happy to be counterpoint. But right now, one of our companies at Playground, Psi Quantum, we expect that we will have 2 million qubit quantum machines built over the next 2 to 3 years, right? And 1 million qubits is sort of like the magic number, because that means you'll have, on the order of thousands, right, of useful qubits, logical versus physical qubits. There's lots of magic and error correction. But at that level, everybody agrees if we can get to 1 million qubit quantum machine, we're going to solve problems that were totally unsolvable, before, and we'll be able to accomplish major breakthroughs. So our belief is that will be before the end of this decade. And if we do that, and this is what I describe as the great trinity of computing, that we'll be able to have, a big AI, portions where we're able to do low radix, computations and probabilistic effects. We'll have big classical HPC machines doing, high precision math and big data sets. And we're going to have a corner of that data center that is big quantum machines, solving quantum problems. And the three of those coming together, maybe it's not the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but I think this is like the trinity of computing, and we're going to bring that together over the next few years, and I'm quite thrilled to be part of that.
Wow. Okay, so somewhere between...
And I'm pretty mellow about this, but anyway.
Yeah, a little bit, a little bit. Somewhere between 2 and 20. And since you're my boss, it's 2.
Yep,
it's
absolutely.
the right answer.
Good, done. Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about AI specifically.
Yep.
And you said yesterday that AI is going to be far greater than the internet age, where you got to go online once on Tuesday, I think, and then again on Friday, right?
Oh,
yeah, that was exciting.
It was a holy moment.
But AI is bigger. Why is AI different than the previous technology? Thanks for Wi-Fi, by the way. Thanks for USB. Why is it different than the previous tech revolutions?
Yeah, I think there's 2, maybe 3 things that make it quite different. The first thing was every next evolution of computing is building on the shoulders of the prior. So, we now have, approximately 60% of humanity now is connected to the internet, right, at this point. So, 20 years ago, that number was like 20%. So AI, right, is building on, 20 years of progress of connecting humanity with wireless, internet, Wi-Fi, et cetera. So, the first is the next wave is building on the last wave, which makes it always bigger, right? Second is this comment I made yesterday where AI, we're now, computers are adapting to us as opposed to us adapting computers. And, the last speaker, isn't that awesome? right? How we're cracking languages. I mean, this is the first time, since Tower of Babel that language will not be an issue, right? Where truly, you'll be able to speak in Japanese and I'll be hearing in English. And when I hear the Japanese, it will also give me contextualization and context, and with that, the Japanese speaker said yes, but he just meant he heard you, not that he agrees. Right, it's just the power of that, for human and society, just awesome. So computing adapting to us as opposed to us adapting to computing. The third aspect of AI to me is, it is an infinitely scalable problem, right? As we see it today. How much is the incremental value of intelligence? Hey, I mean, it's almost unlimited. Right, so the ability to take AI problems and scale them, and one of the things, and my dear friend John back here, my partner on the 386 thing, we were always fighting with how much parallelism could we extract to perform the computation. Right, and you have all these crazy things in microarchitecture, branch buffers, and other ways to find parallelism. AI is an infinitely parallel problem. Right, we have tensor parallelism, you're going to have multiple scales, you're going to have different contextualization, different parallel conversations, an infinitely scalable problem. So we just see decades, right, of improvement in AI computations going forward. So for those three reasons, I think we just got a couple of incredible decades in front of us. And computing had gotten somewhat boring, right? Okay, let's add some more cores to the processor. Let's go speed up the I/O networks a little bit. Okay, let's go from DDR4 to DDR5. Maybe we'll add 50 watts to the CPU. Boring. And then AI happened. Now we're talking about 3,000 watt GPUs. We're talking about cluster sizes, of scale up and scale out, of 100,000 GPUs working, in parallel, the largest memory capacities that we've ever built. I mean, it's just quite extraordinary how it's just blown the doors open, on every aspect of computing. So, really as a technologist, this is paradise found again. I mean, it really is exciting.
All right, so speaking of decades, in that case, give us a little bit of vision. You've spent the last 4 decades watching these tech revolutions. You can look back, you can look at them with more detail than almost anyone in this room and maybe anyone in the world. And so using that experience, what do the next 3 decades or 4 decades look like? Do we see the positive impacts of AI? What negative impacts of AI? What impacts do we see in the economy and social life and relationships?
Yeah, so I do think that we just got 2 good decades in front of us just based on AI alone, and we're going to see it enter many different domains. So imagine your normal wake-up time is 6 a.m. Tomorrow your smart device wakes you up at 5 a.m. and it says, I detected your 3rd heart irregularity this month. You're now in a risk zone. Right, I've uploaded all your biometrics to the cloud. We've now run the complete analysis. Your smart, the bots that are working on your behalf, ran the complete biomarker analysis against the entire DNA pool, right, of the planet. We've made an appointment for you at your heart doctor this morning. We rearranged your morning's calendar, right, in response to that. We loaded into your self-driving car the directions to the doctor's appointment. It's on the other side of town. And because of that, we had to wake you up early for this. We moved your Starbucks order, right, to a Starbucks on the way. And of course, you are going to the heart doctor, so we made it decaf. Okay, this is going to happen, right? I mean, every aspect of that, it sounds preposterous and it sounds very real, right? We're going to have autonomous driving. We're going to have DNA biomarkers. We're going to be able to compute. We're going to have smart bots working on our behalf. All of those kind of things, emerges. So I just see these areas that truly we're taking AI and improving the quality of life, right? It also is going to democratize things like education, right? We have 300 million, kids in poverty today that if we educate them, we will break the cycle of persistent poverty. What a magic thought that we could truly eliminate extreme poverty on our planet, right? We're going to eliminate diseases that have, held people, right, in terror, right? We've solved heart diseases, right? We're going to solve cancers. We're going to attack, brain diseases in this environment. My weaknesses, I wear hearing aids. These are neurally enhanced hearing aids from a friend of mine who, is the CTO for Starkey, right? And in the future, my hearing aids are going to prompt me as my mental capacities diminish, enabling me to stay more connected with society and my family than ever before, and that stimulation will minimize the effects of brain degradation. I mean, these things are in our lifetime, baby. We're going to do incredible things, and I think, so many of those over the next 10 years as we, take, Thomas Friedman, the world is flat with technology. You ain't seen nothing yet, baby. This is going to be a thrilling decade or two in front of us. I do think in the second decade, you said 10, 20, 30 years, by then I think the benefits of quantum computing are going to start coming at scale, right? Where we're going to be able to, truly study, the periodic table as never before, new material discovery at pace, being able to solve, things like protein folding, DNA understandings, personalized medicines. Those are not possible today with today's technology. But as you start combining, my trinity of computing, I fully see them coming into a place as well. And then of course we have to make it cost effective for the planet. And today, and I do think this race to intelligence today is making AI less economic, not more. Right, and we have to see dramatic reductions in the cost profiles, because if we're going to truly touch the planet, they have to be far more accessible than they are today. So the idea, that I need a gigawatt data center to do a valid training run, okay, that's not viable, right? My brain is 20 watts. We have to, have dramatic improvements in cost, power, efficiencies if we're truly going to make these technologies available, to the planet. And for that, hey, as a person of faith, I want to participate in improving the lives of every human on the planet so that we get to accelerate the return of Christ our Savior.
Amen. Amen. All right, we have a few minutes left. How does the faith ecosystem show up to really stamp this? And you're at Glue, taking over your head of technology, the executive chairman at Glue. How is Glue and collectively the faith ecosystem, because no one organization is solving this, right? How do we allow faith to start to shape the future of these technologies?
Well, I love to think about, how often has the faith ecosystem shown up to shape technology, right? We did so for essentially language, right, for education, and for healthcare. That's a pretty good track record. Almost every hospital bears its roots from the faith ecosystem. Almost every form of higher education bears its roots, in the faith ecosystem. We've done this before, and imagine, right, together. And one of the things to me that's just hideous about our ecosystem is we spend all of our time debating why we're different than each other as opposed to saying how we're the same. Right, there, when you look at the underlying values of our community, man, right, there's a few things you crazy Methodists believe that I think are a little bit berserk, and right, the Southern Baptists, and well, of course, you Foursquare and Pentecostal folks. I mean, we are so alike, but we spend so much of our energy talking about the areas that we're different, right, in that regard. And if we're going to be meaningful, right, to influence technology as a force for good, we have to do it together, right? And to me, that's something, at the foundation, right, of, why we're here at Missional AI is doing it together. And, hey, you're okay as a crazy Pentecostal. I don't mind, right? Come together, right, because we agree on so much, right, in it. And for that, the underlying values and, like the flourishing elements, we have shown such extraordinary benefit to humanity that if we come together, shape technology, and remember, all of the other large language models today, they have relative truth, right? They're training on crazy social media crap, right? We're training on the foundation of knowledge that is absolute truth. Now, which model do you believe in more? Okay? I know which one I believe in more, right? Because we have absolute truth. that we're putting at the foundations, how we think about values and shaping, for the future. And, for us at Glue, we want to be a facilitator to enable your greatness, right? It's going to be all the brands, all the different ministries, all the different churches, parachurches, et cetera. How can we be of service to you to make you extraordinarily successful in your vision? Right? Because, hey, these things are hard. The security elements, the data elements, the networking elements. This is hard work. Please don't waste your energies doing that, right? Spend your energies in leveraging these foundational technologies to fully execute your mission and your vision. And we want to consolidate a lot of that gruddy, hard, foundational work so that we enable you to be far more productive, impactful, and successful. That's our job.
That's great. We're at time. One final reflection or challenge to the Missional AI community.
There's been incredible conversations here, right, as part of it. And, the Google folks yesterday, the Facebook fellow today, or Meta folk, I'm sorry. To me, the opportunities that we give to have the brightest minds that are aligned with the vision. And to me, every great team I've been part of in my career, and I've been a part of a number of great teams, the team comes together with a shared vision, right? And when you get committed to that vision, you can fire me, you can take my salary away, but I'm going to finish that vision, right? That's the team, that gets people truly thrilled to be part of, because we want to go solve things that are important. We don't want to do it with people that we enjoy working with, right? And one of the greatest things about Glue is we're serving some of the greatest people in the world. People that have such great values, great mission. They've been at it for decades. So you want to solve hard problems. You want to do it with brilliant people, right? You want to do it right with people that you enjoy. And that's what we're doing here together, and it's truly a great honor to be able to participate today with Missional AI. So thank you so much.
Agreed. It is an honor. Thanks, guys.